Why don't you start?
If art is made to
If art is made to awaken possibility for the audience.
If art is made to awaken possibility for the audience, then we seek to awaken possibility in every available medium. The need for oral, visual, and textual stimuli must be met by whatever means necessary. The writings of the band, as collected in 3 speaks, have proven to be effective, but not enough for the digital age. This marks the creation of a forum for musicians, writers, artists, thinkers, and all others to participate in a discussion about the issues they feel are most affecting the production of their art. Through detailed interviews and discussions, we hope to highlight the ways others are awakening possibilities, or failing to do so, as a means of further relighting excitement in our audience. But the following speak for itself: the elite and the backward.
Since 2011, Kids' Choice has been playing their brand of high-energy pop across the Pioneer Valley. Originally consisting of Michael Healy, Cooper Evans, and Angus Davidson on guitar, piano, and violin respectively, the band has expanded to a 5-piece, playing shows at Hampshire College and the Iron Horse. We sat down with Cooper Evans and Angus Davidson to talk about what music means for them and what politics go into being a band and what's next for Kids' Choice.
This is The Elite and the Backward, episode 3. We're here with Angus and Cooper from Kids' Choice. How are you guys today?
Super good.
Doing great.
So I thought we would start today by talking about your current projects. You want to start, Angus?
Sure.
I know you're your Div 3.
Sure. Well, so I'm a 4th year at Hampshire, so that means I'm working on my Div 3, which is like a senior project, and it's in 2 components. And one of them is a performance aspect, and one of them is a writing and research component. So in the performance part, they're kind of within that. There are even 2 subsets. One is piano performance. So I'm studying piano. I'm going to do a couple of pieces from the Time Curve Preludes by William Duckworth, and then this cool. They're kind of like, he calls them the post minimalist. Well-tempered clavier. So they're a collection of preludes that have these weights, and you put them on the bottom couple of keys on the instrument, and they lift the sustain for those notes. So as you play these like repeated rhythms, there's these hazy sort of like sympathetic strings just ringing underneath what's going on. So that's one part of it. So I'm preparing a bunch of those and a couple of other pieces, I think, and then I'm studying instrumental conducting at UMass this semester so that I can focus on leading rehearsals for a piece by Andreessen that Greg is in and that Cooper's in called Workers' Union, which is sort of an amalgamation of a bunch of different styles. And it's kind of like no other piece that I've ever played before. So there's a lot of learning about how to run rehearsals as I go. And then the other side is music. It's a composition pedagogy. So I thought I was going to be doing music composition, and then I sort of got to this place where I felt like I wasn't ready to have enough to create my own structure for a whole year composing. So I wanted to study how composition is taught in the liberal arts, and how students create structure, and how the curriculum structures for students. So I've been interviewing 3 professors from Smith and Hampshire colleges, 3 composition professors, and they all, one's very old school, one sort of in the middle, and studied with like Milton Babbitt, kind of like late 20th century, and then one is a new professor at Smith who's I think of a much younger generation. So they each have their own kind of take on teaching, and from that I'm just starting to dive into my sort of conclusions about what's going on in composition teaching in the liberal arts. And yeah.
Do you want to reveal any of your conclusions about composition teaching?
Yeah, well, my belief, and this is grounded also, I'm realizing, in my subjective experience and kind of what I want to do with music, I'm realizing in the world. But my belief is that the way that programs, that the teachers happen generally to teach is that they're profoundly influenced by the way that they learn. So the learning environment that they were in, oftentimes it's very easy to create the curriculum that you're in. And what I'm finding is that sometimes I think professors find that they want to create this environment where students can where they're mentoring students. So the model that exists currently is students make their own aesthetic choices, and the professor helps the student from the student's start point. And what happens is, because generally as students or as beginning composers, we tend to create around idioms and styles that we know. That works best. That format works best when people are familiar with a lot of different potential start points and a lot of musical idioms. So, and one of the concerns that professors raise in a liberal arts situation where you're not getting 5 semesters of music history or being involved with a lot of different musical concepts is that the number of start points that people have and the number of tonal languages or non-tonal languages that people have are less than they might be in the environment where a lot of teachers come from. And so it seems like there's my big takeaway is that there's a lot of potential for a different model that would utilize, that would involve trying to have more of a curriculum that deliberately facilitates a variety of different musical idioms as start points. So it might change the parameters of the composition assignments to challenge students to try different areas, and to more fully, there's a lot of potential in the liberal arts model, which involves reading, discussion, and written response. Those are a lot of things that I'm finding in composition are things that potentially could be also helpful that are currently not being as fully utilized as they are in other areas in the liberal arts.
Well, I think you passed.
Nice.
I think the question of how to properly teach composition, if at all, is really interesting. 'Cause as I'm sure you know, a lot of famous composers were against it, like Bartók.
Morton Feldman.
Oh, really?
Morton Feldman was also said that it was impossible. And then I can't remember there's some very famous anecdote where Morton Feldman was like, you can't teach composition, and one of his students was like, aren't we in this is day one of a composition course, and he made he's kind of a witty guy, so he made some comment, but no, it's a very classic.
I think one of my big issues is that I felt like in certain composition seminars that I've taken, I've been encouraged to just kind of become a clone of that professor.
Mm-hmm.
Which is one thing. I know you're doing a project, you're researching Kate Soper.
Mm-hmm.
What I really like about studying with her is that she basically says nothing about herself.
Yeah.
Whereas other professors I've worked with have kind of been like, oh, well, when I wrote this piece, I tried this. Why don't you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah,
because I'm not you, that's why. I think, and the same way to bring this into the rock world, one of the big criticisms of things like there's School of Rock now, or various rock band camps that you can go to, that I think in some ways are great because they're well, here's how you do it, but also half the fun of being in a band is learning everything yourself and I played that really shitty gig, now I know what not to do.
Right.
And kind of that individual spirit of rock music in some ways is maybe destroyed by those schools.
Yeah. And that's one of the great benefits of it seems like experiential learning is one of the things that works actually really well in the open-ended structure. It's and one of the people that I've talked to has said, my job is just to have students create as much work as possible because people learn experientially. So the more that people do in composition and, the more that you hear maybe that wasn't the right register for this. And again, like you said, it totally translates into almost all facets of learning. The more you just get out there and play a gig and you're like, that promoter was really terrible and we know not to work with it. It's I think that definitely, no matter what, is certainly a component of learning. It's just that I talked to my advisor and it's it seems like this kind promotes experiential learning and this doesn't, and she was well, everybody learns through experiential learning. There's sort of no debate. It's just how much experience you're going to get doing,
Right.
And I definitely think that's a great point that translates to almost anything that you're going to be doing with creative work.
Well, maybe we can look forward to a new composition school from you someday.
It's a dream.
The Angus method.
The Angus method.
Alright, so what's going on with you, Cooper? Tell us about your diff 3.
I am studying pop music. I'm studying the top 40 pop music, and it started with analyzing Well, first I was looking at like who are these pop songwriters who keeps popping up on the top 40 charts for the past 13 years. I was going to look at it from a very recent standpoint because I find often people don't study music until it's really old and then they're like, all right, cool, now it's safe to study. And I was like, cool, I want to do something that's like brand new, and a lot of people are going to be like, it's stupid and not worth studying. So I like that sort of pressure. So I looked at whatever the like who is writing all these songs and who's writing them over and over again, and I found 3 different people that I was interested in, but I ended up focusing on this guy Lucas Gottwald, who's like very popular and a big pop songwriter. So I looked at his 24 songs that made it on the top 40 year-end charts, which is like of the last year, which 100 songs were played the most, and these were the top 40 or whatever. So he had like 24 of those songs, and then I transcribed them all and analyzed them like you would like classical form music, phrase structure, overall form, intervals, where's the highest note in the piece, what's the chord progressions, where are the cadences or something, looking for patterns, looking basically for tools that I could pull out of it, like anything that's happening in every song or anything that happens a lot. I want to be able to say, okay, so this is exactly what's happening. Like if a verse is more than 17 seconds long and it's periodic, like it fully repeats itself, when it comes around the second time after the chorus, he'll cut it in half. Like that happens every time if it's within those guidelines. And now I sort of had to design those guidelines to fit into it because there was probably some verse that was like periodic but less than 17 seconds, so it went the whole way or something.
Is that the hard rule? It's 17 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now, and here's the thing, like I'm creating these like Gottwald rules of composition, of like top 40 composition, much like I think people did like box rules of voice
That's
leading.
exactly what I was gonna say.
Or counterpoint, first speech counterpoint. Like there wasn't really any rules, and then people were like, now there's gonna be rules about it because we saw
like,
someone do
well,
it.
this is what that guy did.
Yeah. So here's your rules. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm doing basically, but in a very new age form, with the idea, much that I think voice leading was like, this is the best way to write. Like this is the most beautiful way. Like I'm saying, these are the rules that make the most people enjoy your song and make it the most catchy. Like I have a very clear like, if you're trying to write a pop song that's super catchy and has mass appeal, like these are what I think are going to help you get there. I think there's a lot of different ways to get there, I'm discovering, and there's like every once in a while a song shows up on the radio that you're like, this is just different than the rest of them, but it just worked out because of the lyrics or the cultural time when it was released or how it was released or something. But so a lot of analysis, transcription. Once I find some tools and patterns, then I start writing a piece with it, where I'll be like, okay, now that I know the form of all the pop songs, like they all have a very similar form, now I'll write a bunch of songs in that form. Okay, now I'll write a song that doesn't use that form at all, like uses the opposite of it, or just like mixes it around, or adds like 6 new sections. Like, can it still be catchy, or is it like, no, that's way too many sections? So that's like all sorts of little experiments like that in composition, and you're playing them, and Angus is playing them. And Paul will sing lead on all of them.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Never got around to asking you.
Yeah.
I figured we'd do it on the air.
I just assumed.
Yeah.
I got it down.
So that's like the composition piece, and then there's this whole paper world of it that's like writing all of these ideas and concept down. And I've talked to Angus about sometimes like someday going through the paper, picking out the best of those little concepts and like slowly releasing them as like single little blog issues or something of like, hey, you like Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus? Like, here's a really interesting part in it. Like, here's the measure of 2/4. This is why I think it's important. Like, blah, 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 larger concept post or something. Like, something that I feel like musicians who are composers, who are trying to write music that is really accessible to a lot of people, but maybe also creative, like, would be really interested in these tools and be like, oh, I'd like to use some of those, but then also put my own stuff in there or whatever. Because I think sometimes when, at least for me a year ago, when I thought of pop music, like I knew it was like a craft that someone knew how to do really well, but I was more like, oh, if I want to write a pop tune, I just like do the same 4 chords and like, which is like partly true, but then there's a lot of other things. Like you can do that and write a really, really, really bad song that no one wants to listen to. It's like very easy to like try to write a pop tune and then just be like, no, it's not, it doesn't really have anything to it. But so that's sort of my struggle and growth and learning. And then there's like pieces of it. It's interesting. I just got this email from Becky Miller saying like, your paper is very poorly written and you have so much work to do on it. And I'm like, oh, classic, really challenging. So now I'm thinking about all, like, the paper is like such a different part of the project to me, where it's like, no one's gonna read it. It's never gonna be amazing. Like, as a paper writer, I'm not gonna write something that everyone's like, oh, I just want to read it so bad. Which you'd think would be the goal of writing a good paper, yeah. But the concepts will be interesting. But I'll just, like, I don't know how I'll talk to people about them. I'll present them at something. I'll talk about them at the performance. But it's interesting how I'm realizing right now they're separate entities to me. Like, transcription, analysis, tools. I'm doing all these, like, statistics about it, like what percentage of songs have this happen. And then compositions that we write, practice, perform, and then record. And I'm like, that's the track. And then on the side, it's like all of this put into something so that I can read it later. And I'm like, cool, I get that. I'm learning skills here. It's just very hard and very different and very insular.
I guess that is, like, the folly of the music Div 3. Like, I'm experiencing that too, where, like my composition is, like, very much going in one direction and I love it. And then I'm also, like, trying to write a music analysis paper that just... They're related, but it's weird. I'm sure you're probably going through something similar.
Yeah. I find there's a joy for me in being able to switch, because I remember I took one semester. In the last year, for the fall semester, I took 5 courses in a bunch of different areas, like creative writing, like I had a widespread, and I was like, go and create, went super hard, and I was like, I just need to have a couple things to focus on. The next semester I did piano performance, composition seminar, and one other thing that was, like, super open-ended with just creativity, and was, like, only creating all the time for me was, for me anyway, I think in this room I need a little bit more structure of the people in this room, I would guess. So for me, having the writing side where I need an outline and I need to figure out what how the topic sentence relates to the body sentences in the paragraph, like, it does help me. But I love, in Coop's, one of my favorite things about Cooper's is that his thinking about the pieces that Cooper is writing, how the ways in which you can identify the tools that make the magic of Kesha and Pitbull, and how you both use those, but also, like, subvert them. Like, your pieces also have some weird, and if you know Cooper is a composer, very vertically dense, and, like, he'll have these moments of, like, weird metric changes and, like, super dense ideas crammed into, like, one section. And so, like, with Cooper finding, like, the moments where the tools that he's finding in his analysis influence his composition, but also there's this other input. So seeing, for Cooper, the way those kind of feed into each other, that one has some interesting ramifications as someone who's kind of, I live with
a lot of it.
Cooper and I are roommates, so I'll either hear him at night, like, punking out things, or I'll listen to his conclusions, and then hear his scores and just hear how these things fit. It's really cool to see that in that way, that they do, A and B kind of do meet in this weird estuary of musical theory and practice, and where they deviate and where they don't.
It has been interesting. Some of the pieces that we've played with you so far have been like I can tell that you've been analyzing pop music, but there's also some, like, distinctly Cooper elements.
Yeah, like what? Tell me about it.
Like in that one, the tune you gave us the other day, To a Pond. Like that sax solo over it is, like, it's so Cooper. Like, I don't know. I feel like somebody doesn't even need to know who you are to be like, that's, like, not a regular thing. That's just Cooper being Cooper.
Especially because solos. This is another thing that I really in pop music now, like top 40. The idea of the solo is dead.
Yeah.
Like, I heard a solo on something recently, and I was like, oh, great musicianship. And I was like, and this is great because sometimes I find solos to be masturbatory and just, like, overly, like, just, like, too much. And I heard one that was fantastic, and I was like, whoa, in pop music, there's very little individual, like, stylistic expression is, like, the lead singer's zone, and that's the sax solo in that way is actually a fairly subversive element of that tune too.
Well, that's a good point.
But the sax solo was put in. I mean, it's a soli, because you're right, there is no solos anymore. I have a sax solo in one song where Jacob, there's, like, a solo break, and then Jacob, like, shreds, which was
right.
which was something where I was like, there aren't solos in pop music. So that time I was like, this is actual solo. But then this other one is, like, a sax soli, where it is, like, taking the place of the vocal part. It's like me and Jacob.
Is that I didn't know what's the difference between soli and solo?
Soli is two people playing the same thing, and solo is just one person playing.
Music major. deficient in content knowledge. That's what I would term myself in my paper.
So on that note, let's talk about Kids' Choice.
Cool.
So you've been together, what, like 4 years, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
In various stages.
Yeah,
but
various stages. The complete fivesome wasn't all together until last year fall, right?
Yeah.
Or last year spring was the first time that we were actually like at school. But we were like playing together last year fall.
Because I think remember when I met you guys, I think it was still a trio.
Yeah.
No, I think because you came to the orientation show. Well, maybe it was a trio. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I don't fully remember, but I think I had seen you in like multiple iterations.
Yeah. Originally, we were a trio of guitar, violin, and piano, and then we added drums and bass at some point. The timeline's kind of messy. A lot of ins, a lot of outs.
And you played with horn sections too before, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And me and Mike got to school not knowing, like we had 3 of the songs we still play, and we were like friends with Angus, but we weren't like. Well, it was just like we'd hung out for probably a week without thinking like, oh, let's be in a band together. And then we played him some song, and I was like, I play fiddle. And we're like, great, let's do it. And that's when I think Kids' Choice was born, taken from like, what?
I was up and Will Meyer brought us in for a jam session like day 2.
Well.
And you had your sax, and I had my violin, and it was like behind Dick, and I was like, I really don't want to get into jam world. Like, I don't like jam world. Yeah. And it was like it was not fun, and it's like, sometimes you gotta put in those calories before you're speaking the same language.
I remember that. It was outside, yeah.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was ready to do something else.
Yeah, we had some pretty awful awful jams.
Jams can be really bad.
Yeah. They actually frankly still are sometimes. That to say, at our last show, I think we pulled off a jam pretty well.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Our drummer, his bass pedal, the mallet snapped off.
Whoa.
The mallet snapped.
Like the mallet on the pedal.
Wow.
It wasn't metal, or
it was.
Oh my god!
Wow.
You know, when you're just like fucking brutal like us.
How did the head of the drum not break?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's so weird.
It's amazing the metal broke first.
I've seen Owen break the head of the kick drum with which is always great.
There's always that like funny moment of panic. You're like, what do I do now?
Yeah,
so then you like did some loop. You guys like jammed it out for a little bit while.
Yeah, we just did.
We did like this bass recorder duet for a bit.
Like
yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
Cool.
Which I thought went just about as well as it possibly could have.
It was one of those things where if you didn't see Paul like trying to figure out his life back there on the kit, what you would think is, oh, look at Derive, those being stupid as usual.
Right, so back to Kids' Choice. Why the name? I've always been really curious. Where does the name come from?
I think there's, as most things in Kids' Choice, there's a disagreement about everything. But I remember the story of the name of like me and Mike and Angie were like trying to figure it out. We were Swamp Swans for a little bit, which Angus really liked, but Mike couldn't say. We had all sorts of like potential names in the beginning.
Wait, hold on. Like, he physically couldn't say it, or like he had like a moral issue?
Physically couldn't say it.
Challenging.
He was like Swamp Swans. I can't say it. We're not doing it.
Isn't the context of like one car ride?
Yeah. We were Swamp Swans for like 3 days.
We had a gig that night, and we had to figure it out really bad in advance of our first gig.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been talking about it for a week, but like hadn't really come to anything. We're like, all right, we got to do it. And we had this, and somehow we were like, well, we feel like we want to play music that people really enjoy, and like it's like the kids, like we want to, our audience is like just young people who like want to jump around and have fun, and it's loose. And we thought of that as a very hamster thing. We were like, we want to be the kids' choice. That people are like, oh, I want to see this band. That's the kids' choice or whatever. So something about, I always say, this is where it really starts to deter. I always like the term choice as like a powerful thing. Like I work at a summer program where it's all about like kids being able to choose their classes and walking around on their own or whatever. So I like having kids like, the kids are in control and they're choosing it or whatever. So there's some piece of it that I enjoy. It sounds like maybe that wasn't really there when it was first created, and it was more just like kids' choice, like, oh, they like our music because it's fun and it's they're coming to be relaxed or whatever. I don't know.
I think also the fact that there's an institution called Kids' Choice, the Kids' Choice Awards. You know, like there's something about it that's already in our lexicon. I also think it's healthy, but you know, we had this big thing we were trying to change. We were talking about changing the name, and in that I think we started. I think I think with anything you start mythologizing, or you know, like we get that question in interviews, and I think that's how you build up the story, and I think that's actually totally healthy. You know, it's like you have this origin stories that are as old as, you know, Gilgamesh or whatever. You know, it's
humanity
like so as disputed as they are, I also think there's something about that's like the central attitude of that idea, which is that we're also like very boyish and very childish sometimes, and that there's something about that like conceptually at its heart there's just like we're just trying to have fun and jump around. That's, you know, I think that there's something to youthful energy there that is very true.
Yeah,
that I can agree to.
I do think that I probably haven't seen you for about a year live, but every time I have seen you, I've always thought that like the name is appropriate.
That's good. That's great.
Which is good. I hate when bands have inappropriate names.
Yeah.
Skunk Fest.
Yeah, like, are you a bunch of skunks?
Come on, man.
Yeah, get it together, dude.
Be People Fest.
So I was talking about this before, but I think it's really interesting how like two kid-themed bands have popped up in the Valley. What's up with that? Is there something going on?
And Young Tricksters.
Oh, and Young Tricksters. That's a good point.
Because when we did a show with all three, it was like the youth show,
youth
pageant.
So what's going on?
I think they're going at the same thing, and the kids is like, hey, it's like I think maybe it's somehow safe to be like, we're just kids, we're just young, we just like want to do our thing and be free and loose or whatever. Young, I think that's something that people identify with when they're starting a band, is they feel like Kids' Choice. It was like, we're not a band yet. Like when you're deciding your name, like you feel like we're not even quite there yet. So there's something that's like nice to be like, I'm young, this whole project feels young. If I say kid, it kind of takes a little weight off of it. Like if it was like adult time, it's like, okay, that's very serious, I guess. And like,
I like that.
Yeah. And it's like,
I just trying to picture your songs about like paying your electric bill.
Yeah.
Going to law school.
Yeah, it's like there's something about kids that is like, oh, those are the things we want to write about right now, and that's how we feel still. Like we don't feel like adults. We're at Hampshire College, and like maybe we're supposed to be older because we're in college, but it's like, no, I'm still running around or whatever. It's like, I think that's where some of it comes from. I think, and the kids, like, I don't really know what their deal is in the world, but I know they went to high school with Who to Funk It, or like they like hung out with them at a camp or something.
Yeah, I think they all grew up around here.
Yeah,
I don't really know.
I think they still feel like kids in a lot of it. Like they're in their hometown. I don't know if they're going to school or what they're doing. They're like playing in a band. They're just like keeping it loose and chill and like not having big responsibilities and worrying about crazy stuff or whatever. I think that's where it comes from.
And I also think that it makes me think about the adult thing, and I was thinking about how sometimes in rock and roll there's the whole like, you know, like you're like the currency is like not really caring, and that's like the kind of like detached, like whatever, we don't care.
Yeah.
It feels like it's also a different way to look at the fact that in like popular music you have a level of not being inhibited, but rather than coming from like for us, because you know like you can't do that like Mick Jagger or whatever thing. It's like
I don't think we want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it's a different approach to this idea, and it's not having to do with apathy necessarily. Not that that's his deal either, but I think there is a like sort of this like apathy approach to making music in like concert halls for like young people or whatever. And this is a different way to approach that by being childish or being, you know, like that you can be lighthearted in that approach as well.
We really care, but we really care about everyone just having fun and not caring.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm grabbing onto a lot is this idea of like what defines being a youth. And it's for me, like as somebody who grew up basically like exclusively listening to and studying like the early 80s punk thing. Based on that, like my definition of youth is like rebellion. And so for me as like somebody who like, you know, like doesn't drink, I don't do drugs, I'm a vegan, just like 1.5 million things that I like refuse to participate in. For me that's youthful. So I guess one of my questions is music inherently youthful in itself?
I think there's something with the creation of music that is inherently youthful because it is young. And like if you create something, it is born out of your brain and fingers or voice or whatever, and
Right.
therefore it is like new to the world, and therefore it is young and youthful, and it has some of that. There's something about something that's new that has a youthful energy of like, whoa, here it is. But I think music in the larger theme is not inherently youthful. I think there's a lot of music that's inherent, like that's so goddamn ancient and old and has no youthfulness in it. But music can be played in a lot of different ways. You can always bring new life to it or whatever, or a youthful energy. I don't think it's inherently youthful though.
Mm-hmm.
My mom just framed like a print that I made for her when I was like a kid. I don't know where this came from, but one of the smartest things I did as a kid. But it says, "You're not old. You don't stop making art when you get old. You get old when you stop making art." And she further, which I'm like,
That's
oh,
cute.
nice. I did good as a fifth grader. I think it's good.
You made that?
I made it. Yeah, I don't think I might have gotten that little
Oh, okay.
aphorism
That would
from
be
somewhere,
genius
but
if
I
you
did.
made it.
I did print it on a nice. It looks good.
You peaked early.
I peaked early. Yeah, no, it's definitely true. So that's my committee. Yeah. But then it's like when I think about Messiaen, I'm like, is that truly like? Once you start going to the extremes, I don't know if it's true, but I think. But yeah.
Well, it's hard. 'Cause, like, I guess I feel that, like, when Derive plays, I kind of get like this, like, indescribable giddiness.
Yes.
And like that I can't even explain, even if it's like about a really heavy topic. So like for me, in some ways, music is very youthful. But it's like if I listen to a band that just like bores the shit out of me, like like Aerosmith comes to mind. Yeah.
Performing is inherently youthful for me also.
Mm-hmm.
Or not inherently. Like if I'm playing, I don't know, some slow jazz combo ballad, I'm going to feel the energy, but I might not feel it youthful. But like when I play in Kids' Choice, I definitely feel exactly what you're saying. You're like, I can't stop smiling. I'm like, I feel it. And I'm like, I feel good. And like, I'm ready to scream into this microphone. It's like, I know that energy so well. And that does feel inherently youthful.
Maybe it's not the music that has like this youth aspect to it, but the idea of like creating something with your friends.
Yeah.
That like, you know, when I play like in like the improv orchestra or something, I don't necessarily feel the same way that I do when I play with my band, though I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I think that there's definitely like, yeah, that you know, there's kind of like youthful like angst to like being in a band. You know, and like, yeah, me and my friends like got together and like wrote these songs and like we play them live for people and it's really fun and like not many people do that, so that's cool.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And I'll feel it like in the summer camp when I teach kids music, and then they're up playing and I'm just fucking playing the floor tom part and it's like do 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 do, but I'm like so pumped about the floor tom part. I'm like, they're all having a blast, like the audience is going crazy. And that is like when that feeling is even more amplified. But it might be the same growth and birth of like making music with friends. Like even though these friends are 8 and 10, like they're still friends. And it's like, I totally get this feeling. Like I remember when I was younger, like I was playing in some show and like started crying on stage and I was playing the conga and I was like, I wasn't like in the front so no one could really see and I was just like crying a little bit, but it was like, it was so intense and I was like so happy about performing music. But you're right, it's not all music. It's like some music I like playing and I feel good playing, but some music I like, I'm gonna die because it's so great.
Right.
And even it's not even the quality of music. Whatever, I don't know.
What do you think, Paul? You got anything on this?
No, not really. Honestly.
That's okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think just to kind of follow up on what you just said, I think there's also like a big element of like communication.
Mm-hmm.
Not just with the audience, but I think at least I, with my band, have learned from many experiences of playing to like less than 2 people.
Yeah.
Of like, it's much more fun to play a show and be able to communicate with the band, and it like transcends being like this. We're 4 performers on stage doing our thing to we're a band together. And I remember one night in particular where we played to a lot more than 2 people.
Like 5 people.
No, I'm talking about when we played at the Blueberry House.
Oh yeah,
in
that was
Akron.
packed.
it was probably like one of the biggest crowds we played to, and it was really, really fun. Or specifically, there's this moment where we're at this part in this song, and so I think like Paul like dropped a stick, and everybody stopped for a second, and it was like, oh my god, what do we do? And then everybody came back in, like, and it was just this unbelievable instant of communication, and it was the first song of the set, and from there we just like, for me, I feel like maybe that was the moment where we stopped being like 4 people in a band to being like a band, and like kind of like really became like this cohesive unit that like, now I feel like if I look at somebody and like I can tell what they're going to do just like based on like a small body movement. So I think like the communication aspect of being in a band is really
exciting,
amazing, and like indescribable. And then like that's all like, all aside from just like being able to communicate with the audience.
Yeah.
And I know you guys know the feeling really well when like you play to a crowd of people who are really stoked about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of like camaraderie.
It's intoxicating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it totally is.
It's just unbelievable. And that's when we were thinking about there was this gig that we played last semester at Hampshire Halloween, which is a big event here in this 10, and they have this like great sound system. So there's so many. Also, there's a logistical side to that where it's like if you have good sound, someone who's helping with the sound, and you're getting great sound through your monitors. There's just this thing where you create this impetus for you to foster great communication. So if your foundation is set, and then on top of that, you're making great music, and then you're getting great energy from the sound, the crowd who's getting a great mix, and they can identify what the specific logistical factors or acoustic factors are that make it so great. They just know that they're having a wonderful time. And we're up there, and at one point we lit up these confetti cannons, and so it's just like at this wonderful moment. It's actually a Queen cover, so it wasn't our songs, but like there's confetti flying everywhere, and everybody is just like, everybody's going wild. And I remember being like, I have to remember this because this is like the greatest moment of my life. I was like, this is pure. And it was absolutely intoxicating. It was like a divine moment. It was really wonderful. I don't remember where I was going with that because I got sucked into the daydream of.
I think I'll jump right in. I think we get caught up in that a lot.
Yeah.
And
dreams
often,
of grandeur.
Dreams of grandeur, looking at people in the crowd, smiling at beautiful humans, like playing and looking at, like, I think we are so obsessed with this. Kids' Choice is like all about like getting the audience to the show and having a lot of people there and having them really enjoy it. I think we can get lost with our music writing of like writing music that was trying to like writing music for an audience. I remember discovering that like a year and a half ago, like, oh, every song I write for Kids' Choice, I'm not writing for Kids' Choice, I'm writing so that other people will want to hear it.
You're like, oh, here's a tasty moment.
Yeah,
we
I'm
often
like,
look for those.
Yeah, we're like, I want music that people are
candy.
like, oh, that's good music. Not like if it was just me alone in a room, like what would I write? Right. So that's interesting. I think we have shows where Mike's in a bad mood, I'm in a bad mood, someone's in a bad, like, we're not connected, but we go out and sort of stand in a line and look forward. And we have a blast, or I'll have a blast, and Owen had a blast, but Mike and Josh were, like, pissed the whole time. Like, we're not that connected emotionally with each other as much as we are. Like, I think we're a very audience-focused band. Like, all about... And when that works, it really works, and it's fun. But sometimes, and I think we're pretty connected. Like, we know when, like, oh, someone messed up. Okay, here's where we're gonna come back in, or like whatever.
Yeah.
But we don't look at each other as much. Some shows we do, but
the live execution, I think we're auditory, pretty responsive. Visual, we don't have as much of a visual language for responding because I think you're right. The visuals are outward.
Yeah.
And that does make it. There's something about our live performance that can be, and I guess you're always your own worst critic, but I think there's something very feverish about once you hit the start button and you're going, remaining connected and synced with each other can be challenging for us. We often have runaway tempos, and then like midway through the set, it's like, hey, we gotta slow down, like, just trying to rein. It's like, for us, I think there's this like, whoa, we're cooking in the kitchen and there's like a big mess, there's pasta everywhere, watch out, it's like once you get going, it's like trying to contain that fever on stage can be challenging.
And I think the fever comes from this world of trying to make the best show for the audience.
Yeah.
Everybody is thinking about like,
hype it up,
but like, get them into it.
Yeah.
Don't have too much space between songs. No, we need more space between. But it's never, no one's about like, what's our best show for us. It's all about like Owen's like, I don't want to have too much space in between songs because then the audience isn't going to be into that. They don't want to hear us talk. They want to hear us play. And Mike is like, I don't want to have a speed up because it's going to be too fast. Is that how you guys feel? Not too much space between songs?
We'll play an entire set and not stop once.
Yeah.
Like, and then every set is like that.
I'm the same way. I'm like, if we're going to talk, I'm like, I want the person who knows they're going to talk to know that they're going to talk, so they can say their thing and then we get back to it. Like,
we're the planners of that.
Yeah. Whereas Mike is like, I don't like, let's just go through it or whatever, and like he's actually, I think he's down with the like planned out talking. But it used to just be like, every song ends, you have no idea what's going to happen in between. Like maybe someone's going to tell a story, maybe not.
Yeah.
And then we sort of sit there for 15 seconds or 30 seconds and nothing's happening. I'm like, I want every song to go back into each other unless someone has something that they want to say.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we started the band, I think our first few shows, there was a lot of like boring speech making.
Yeah.
But we've definitely kind of moved into this like, I mostly don't feel like there are many bands that have anything interesting to say that they can't say with their music.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you complain to me all the time about, I paid here to go see a show, now watch this fucker just like blab about whatever.
Yeah, it's wildly boring.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way I can describe it. It's like, oh really? You guys were hanging out on your van today?
Yeah.
Really? Like I didn't expect that because you're on tour. It's just like, to me it often just feels like this like stupid vanity show.
Yeah.
More so than like it already is, just being in a band.
By jumping up on choosing that platform.
Yeah.
Now, are you ever? Because I remember I've spent time on YouTube, like researching some of my favorite bands and like watching their funny videos that they make on the tour bus and being like, they're so cool, and like getting so wrapped up in it. And do you never feel that?
If I see like videos that a band posts.
Yeah, or something like that.
Sometimes. I think like there might have been a point in my life, like when I was younger, where like that kind of stuff would really interest me.
Yeah.
But now, and it might be because I'm a musician, like a music major, that I spend a lot of time just like thinking about music that like I just like don't give a shit. Like if a band is like hanging out on the bus, or like we're all going to Steve's house. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's because I'm like in a band, so like I know what all that stuff is like.
Yeah.
Maybe for like people who aren't exposed to that kind of lifestyle, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
But at least like at shows, unless I'm seeing a band that is like typically outspoken, like I've seen Anti-Flag a few times, who definitely like in between songs will be like liberal agenda or whatever, and like that's fine because like that's the kind of band they are.
Yeah.
But I know we saw a band, we saw the Spinto band.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
2 times last summer, 2 days in a row, and both nights before they played one song, he told the same exact story. And it was just like, and he took way too long to tell it, and just like, why? Like
tough.
This like does absolutely nothing for the song.
Yeah.
And it, it's just like,
I think that's a
silly
great.
vanity.
I think tending that way is great because, especially in our new Facebook world, that it's like we love the minutia of people based on this. Like once you're Bradley Cooper, it does become interesting. Like when you go to Dunkin' Donuts, and like I love the nobility of not being. I think it can be really appealing to us because the idea of ever having a tour bus, or like I think again we get stuck in these sort of daydreams about the act of being a rock and roller or whatever, that like I think it's really cool to not be caught in those trappings, and I'd love to be like 10% less interested in the things that I am. Partially because I think the internet is really great at sucking me into, like, they've optimized the things that make you click.
Yeah.
And sadly they're to things that are like the subject matter is not, it's not about quality content, about like the intention behind songs, or like a lot of the time it's about things that don't matter, and I wish that I think it would be cool to be less that my intake was less about that I built less curiosity around things that were about minutia and more about important content or philosophical questions that were interesting, or etc.
Yeah.
I'm remembering before we Derive went on our recent tour, we the night before we watched Instrument, that Fugazi not documentary thing, and I was just thinking about now as you guys were talking that, we went on that tour with a, merch monkey cameraman kind of guy. And,
Wait, what's that? What's a merch monkey cameraman?
Like, someone with no value who...
If you're listening...
I can't wait for Derek to hear that.
I love you, Derek. No, but, we brought, a friend with us to, have company and, take care of some things and help us out and keep us sane.
Oh, merch. He would sell the merch, and he would also have a camera.
He actually didn't really take care of them.
Yeah, I feel like everybody, you know what, that doesn't matter right now.
Back to my story. And I'm thinking about, when you're watching Instrument or you're watching something like that and you're seeing these guys like doing these sort of ridiculous things in their bus or having a weird discussion or a really cool discussion or having a strange moment out in some foreign city. And I think, how cool are they? That doesn't happen to normal people. Why that would never happen to me. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm realizing, that stuff really isn't more than mundane. That totally probably happens to every band, People talk about things in their van, and it might seem cool when you see it. It's Ian Mackay, and they're talking about, like, their DC politics and how, some guy is a real shithead and they don't like what he's doing. Or they're talking about, situationist, philosophy or whatever. But it's like, we do stuff like that. We have weird, stupid moments that when you look back, it's just like, how do sane people go through their lives after something like that happens? And I think I'm realizing, at least for me, it's become like, that happened to me too. I can draw a parallel to that. Maybe that's not so interesting. Maybe it's kind of routine in this life, and we only think it's strange when we see it in that capacity, in a video where we're supposed to think it's like a weird, unique thing.
Yeah.
That was a really good thought, Paul.
Thanks.
You just like, you totally just,
I get one a day. I'm spent now.
That is true. I feel like in every podcast so far, you've spoken once, and it's always been like the end of that topic.
Yeah. Something about like standing up, quoting Baudelaire, and never speaking in your class again. You're welcome.
Anyway, moving on. So we had this idea, you and me, when we were talking, Cooper, that like, is being in a band political? And you actually brought this up, so maybe we could expand on that. 'Cause I think you said that you think it might be.
Well, because you said like you told me Derive, you said that Derive, when it starts, like, had many conversations about like, what are we going to be as a band, what does it mean, what are we into beyond just playing music.
Sure.
Kids' Choice maybe had discussions, but they were not like, what does it mean to be a band beyond playing music, I don't think. We began and exist as a band that if someone asked, like, are you a political band, we'd be like, no, not at all. And then I thought, that's interesting, like, that I don't really think that's true. I think we must be political in ways that we haven't thought or processed or like presented ourselves as. So then I was thinking, like, what does it mean politically to be a band that is claiming to be apolitical?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that came to my mind that I think I said, I was like, we're presenting this music as like all straight white males, and like, what does that mean? What are we trying to say? What are we not saying? What are we doing? What are we doing by not addressing that or saying anything about it or presenting it or something? I don't know.
Right, inaction is status quo. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, if and maybe.
Wow, that was a good quote. Was that a quote? Was that original Angus?
I'm sure somebody has put those two. It's succinct enough.
But apparently you've come up with like a lot of really nice phrases throughout your life.
Yeah, he's good at that.
Since he was 8.
Son of a writer.
I'm sorry, Cooper.
Yeah, no, totally good. I think I mean, I was trying to car like, what is Kids' Choice's like political goals, and it's like, I don't know if there are any. Like, we have goals of the band, but they're not like. It's like, we don't want to spread hate with our music, and we don't want to put anyone down, and we want to have people feel good when they leave the show, and that feels very strong. We don't want to cover songs that spread hate or are saying negative messages. You were saying like, you don't drink or do drugs, and it's like very early on somehow. I think because I don't drink or do drugs, it's like somehow in the band, and Mike in the beginning didn't either. It was like, we don't play shows where anyone's drunk.
Yeah, we
or,
don't drink.
Yeah.
Shows.
And I think that it came originally from a place of like, well, you're gonna play your show better if everyone's sober and like focused.
Totally.
But then we like would look at other bands who would like get fucked for the show and we're like, that just doesn't look good. It seems unprofesh and like doesn't really sound that good and like So I think there's something about everyone's interested in being a band that sounds really good, that people like hearing, is really tight, like gets to the show on time, is easy to work with. Like we don't want to be jerks to anyone, we don't want to make anyone angry. We're not looking to play a show where people leave and are like really depressed or like, but we're also not, we don't go to a show and we're like, we want people to leave and really be thinking about it.
Right.
You know, we want people to leave and be like, I'm humming the tune. Like, I want to download the album. I don't know.
So what I'm getting, which I think is an interesting thought, is that like, even though like a band's subject matter might not be political, there are inherently a lot of politics that go into just being in a band. And I think any band that like wants to play like more than one show has to deal with a lot of these things. Like, how do we operate just like on a like really like basic fundamental level? Like huge questions. Like everybody's beliefs like really come into the mix. Because I know for us, like half the band we're strictly sober, the other half isn't, and that's never ever been an issue for us because we're all agreed like we have practice, we have the shows, and like that's what's important. Afterwards, like
go do your thing.
Yeah, have fun. But before that, like we're here to do a job.
So when you're doing your shows and your practice, is everyone sober?
Typically.
I mean,
sometimes there's some beers, but the people who drink, well, actually, it's really Justin knows his limits.
Yeah. I know my limits.
Yeah, you know your limits, but I've seen you drunk maybe like once in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
It's
just being responsible. It's like you can do these things and be responsible. I know that's a foreign concept to a lot of people, but you can.
Yeah.
And you can do these things and be in a band and have it not even be something you think about. You know?
Yeah.
I think like for me, being in a band where people have different views, but like we can still work together is like really inspiring and really challenging. Like I said, like I'm a vegan and like I have like pretty strict views about like why I think people should be vegans, but I'm the only one in the band, and like talking to them about it, which is actually like a pretty rare conversation, but
it does happen.
It does happen, and it's always really really interesting and challenging, and same when we talk about like, you know, like all ages shows or like drinking or like why was that band acting that way, when we have different views, it's always like, you know, puts you in a different mind frame. Is that...
I have a thought, if you want to go first.
Yeah,
it just brought up things. I was thinking, one thing that we did agree on right off the bat with Kids' Choice was we are friends first and musicians together second, which is really interesting now that I'm thinking about like Dream, where it's like, it sounds like you guys were musicians first and friends has grown out of it or something.
That's very true.
And so my dad was always saying to like, oh, you gotta get like a nice cello player and like get a female lead vocalist. I'm like, Dad, I don't want to just like make my roster of best musicians and then say, okay, let's play. I was like, it's really important to me that when we're making music together, which is incredibly intimate, like I'm already comfortable and I already like this person and I'm already pumped to spend hours and hours a week with them. And I was like, because I remember we were thinking about Trey as a bass player early on. Like I don't know if we ever brought it up to Trey, but I remember we would always talk about like, we really like Trey, he's cool and he plays the bass really fucking well. And we were like, we have no bass, and that was like the first thing that I thought made sense to like, we should have a bass, or like whatever. It was a conversation that came up a few times, but we would always come back to like, oh, we don't really know Trey that well. Like,
yeah, but then you have to hang out with him.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, and like then you can make new friends. I'm realizing, but it was something about like the only people who have entered the band are people that like are incredibly close to us already, or like Angus got to know them a little.
I'm the only person who like didn't grow up with you as a childhood friend.
Yeah. So it's like I like
in the band.
I cannot remember a time when I didn't know our bassist and drummer.
Yeah.
And so that's why it was very easy to be like, oh, I know how to interact with you in a musical setting. I know that if I put my fist up, you're gonna stop drumming. I know that you're a kind and generous person, and that and so there's something that I think now that I realize it, I'm like, I want to start a band where I don't know anyone. Like, that sounds like a fun new adventure now. But in the beginning, I think maybe out of fear, but also out of comfort, and also out of knowing how hard it can be to make music with people. Like, I was like, I want to make music with people where it feels natural and it feels good and we know how to do it together. Not just people who are good at making music, but then after practice are going to be like, all right, I'm going to go do heroin. And I'm like, cool, I really can't connect with you.
Right.
Even though you're a great guitar player or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's interesting. And therefore being friends first makes these discussions that you're talking about, this is where it came from. Like, if we're talking about someone being a vegetarian or drinking at a show or not, it is so heavy and intense because everyone, like, the ground rule is like, well, we're going to be friends forever. So I can say literally anything.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's like,
Really?
oh, it's insane. Because it's like,
Just thoughtlessly.
yeah, it's because
Escalation is totally easy. And
yeah, it's like screaming, yelling. 5 minutes later, like, we're back to laughing. Because it's just like, well, we're just going to know each other for the rest of our lives. So
Yeah.
there's nothing, like, you can't be too cruel, really.
Mm-hmm.
Which is weird. I think it especially happens between Owen and Josh, where someone will get annoyed with each other, and it's like,
You can go, yeah.
it can get really intense. And it's weird because, like, I think it actually makes it really hard to talk about some things because no one has a filter. Like, when you're in a class discussion, like, everyone's a little nervous, so they're willing to be like, cool, I'll compromise a little bit more because I don't want to be the one who's like, only my idea rules. But in Kids' Choice, it's like, it's totally, like, people think it's 100% legal to be like,
Yeah.
this is my idea, I'm not doing anything else. Your idea is stupid.
Yeah, though we have gotten to a place where we've changed. Like, it used to be, I remember when it was like we're all entrenched in our positions and we're digging in, and then now it's like we started incorporating some rules to systematize. We try everything.
Yeah.
Which even when people are like, well, we try everything now, which just happened, like, we do, there's a little bit more of a systematic approach. Like, we got to a super intense, polarized place, and then we had to dig ourselves out from there in small ways, which does happen.
Yeah.
That's so interesting that I don't think I've ever been in a band where, like, that has worked.
What?
Like that, like, non-compromising, like, just that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
Even my first band, I started when I was like 14, with people who I had been friends with since I was like 8.
Yeah.
Who I'm still friends with now. You know, if we had a little argument about anything, that was like we wouldn't talk for like a week.
I totally know what you're saying.
Yeah.
See, I only had like 2 friends. So I couldn't afford to do that, Greg. You're really wealthy here.
But
Friendship.
But it's interesting, like in Derive, I feel like we're all like pretty typically careful. We can like say how we feel, but for the most part, we usually try to be civil about it.
Yeah, that's really
and
cool.
it might be because we typically spend more time together than regular bands.
I'm realizing now, 3 years ago, I met you. 2 years ago, or not even, 2 years ago we met Paul, and it's only been 13 months since I knew who Justin was.
Yeah, like we haven't known each other
It feels like
that
forever,
long.
and it's like no time at all. It's fucked up.
But I definitely, like, even when we do have arguments, I can think of a couple times on tour where, like, things have just, like, very briefly exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Just by virtue of, like, we've been in a car together for so long, I hate you. And it'll be over, like, the stupidest thing. And people just, like, scream at each other. It'll last, like, 30 seconds, then nobody talks for an hour, and then...
Justin makes a racist joke.
Yeah, then, like something
It's back
weird
to
happens, and everybody's like, okay, I guess it's okay now. And,
Yes. Ultra classic.
I know, like, there was a day on tour, like, our last tour, him and I just, like, do you remember that? We just started screaming at each other.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
We were driving to Kent, Ohio.
Yeah.
we were
What
in...
Kent State is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
We were in, like, a Best Buy parking lot and just, like, fucking lost it.
About nothing?
I think we were, like, arguing about directions.
Yeah.
Or, like how to find the
Controversy.
address of
Yeah.
the next venue, and it just, like,
It's like
Use
done.
Bing.
it was
Not using
crazy. But then, I mean, maybe, like, half an hour later, it's, like, fine.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to watch how other bands interact with each other, and like what the nature of their friendship is like. And sometimes I see bands who are totally not friends at all,
That.
and it's like awkward. And it's interesting that you you brought up specifically the contrast between like you guys were friends first.
Yeah.
We were musicians first. But now I feel like I'm at the point where, though like being in this band is like basically my top priority in my life, I feel very professional about it. I still feel like, oh, well, these guys are my friends first. They're my best friends.
Yeah.
And like if there's a problem with them, then like the music's not gonna happen. So, in tying this all back to the beginning of the conversation, this idea of like we're friends first I think is like a very like youthful thing.
Yeah. I never thought of it, but totally. And for me, it's like all friends. Like Owen and Josh, like I was friends with when I was 4. So it's like a very youthful. And we've talked about how Owen interacts. He's the youngest of us by 3 years. He's known me and Josh since he was like has no memory since he was like 2, and like has known Mike for a long time, and interacts with Angus very differently than the rest of us because he's allowed to sort of be the grown-up Owen. Whereas with me and Josh, I think he's like, well, I was developed as like this little guy who like liked guns and violence as a kid, and I'm stuck there. And he
hurtful assumptions.
Yeah, hurtful assumptions that
They're
like
perceptions that are solidified about
Yeah.
are hard to change.
But with someone who hasn't grown up with, you can do a lot more. Angtron or whatever.
So I have 2 more questions. The first, you said something maybe like 10 minutes ago that we kind of got sidetracked from. But you were like, oh well, we're presenting our music as 5 white straight males.
Yeah.
So do you think that like Kids' Choice is like portraying the experience of a white straight male?
Such a good question,
Whoa.
Greg.
Yeah.
It's so good because in our world of racist and all sorts of complicated things, you as a straight white male, you never have to worry about being like, oh, who am I representing my whole race or something, or my whole culture? But now you're asking, are you doing it? I think we've probably maybe never thought about that. Like maybe never been like, are we presenting straight white males? No, that's not true. We have thought about it because we've thought about as straight white males, we want to be respectful to women. We don't want to sing songs that are racist. Like we don't want to be what a lot of straight white males before us have been. So I think we do actually think about I think we've never thought about it with that exact question, but we have thought about how are we presenting ourselves? How are we presenting ourselves being often the horrendous people in power through history, crushing other people's dreams and being horribly violent and hideous in a lot of ways. So we're like, we don't want to be that. We want to be people who are respectful, are willing to open for the other bands, don't need to be like super in charge, want to be really nice to everyone, don't want to be sexist, don't like, you know what I mean? It's like, I think that's what we want to present. And we want to also present like, we're really kind and nice and charismatic and are pumped to talk after the show. But I think that we don't think about as much in a straight white male context and more just of like, who are we as people?
You look like you have a thought.
Yeah, he does.
Well, it made me think also before talking about the sort of like not having a political belief, and it made me think about something that happens a lot in our culture where I think about with like greenwashing and like environmental products, that there's this level where you're not going to build a composting toilet necessarily in your backyard, but you might use like 7th generation dishwasher fluid.
Right.
And to me, I sort of feel like in many ways we are the we're the 7th generation dishwasher fluid, in that our music is chiefly when we say we're doing it for the audience. Another way of putting that is we're doing entertainment, which is to say that we're not raising subversive issues overtly in our music. We're trying to create an experience where you could go and turn your brain off and just dance and have a great time, and that you're not being, I guess our chief objective is not saying we're going to challenge you to think about a controversial issue, but in that way I think what you're doing is you're going to say, if this is going to be our status quo, if we're just going to wash our dishes in our sink, or if then we're going to create there's going to be a clean input where hopefully within this context of entertainment, we're going to think about the covers of the subject material that goes in what we're doing, and that given that system, we're not going to try and reinvent the wheel there, or I think there is a courage in doing that means that you sacrifice in other ways, and I think somehow maybe the artistic delivery system that we chose is still fairly conventional, and within that, it seems like I don't think our music conceptually really challenges that, but hopefully at the very least it's a clean input.
Yeah,
to that format.
I think that's
I would
super perfectly said. If you're gonna watch TV, don't watch maybe Duck Dynasty or the Kardashians. We're like Planet Earth, but we're also not like, I don't know, what's the Amy Goodman's? What's her? What's that?
Amy. Oh, right. East Timor.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
that means nothing to anybody else. But
we're not bringing up intense topics and saying, think about it, challenge yourself. But we're trying not to bring up hideous topics and spread hate.
Right.
You're right. We're in the middle. We're like, well, you'll feel good about it. It's exactly the seventh generation. It was perfect, which is sort of sad, but very genius thought.
I like that
was
analogy.
really
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really so. Kids' choice is like in the middle of the spectrum, which I think is really interesting.
And I think we're trying to brand seventh generation for everyone. Like, we want the music to be creative and complex and interesting and fun, but we want everybody to be able to listen to it. So like, by not saying, hey, I need everyone to like, not that I don't know what bands do this, but like if we were like, we're gonna have a song that's really intense and we need everybody to really listen, and like a lot of you are gonna leave because it's gonna be too intense or whatever, like that you lose this audience or whatever. And we're like trying to have as big of an audience as possible without like trying to do anything evil or horrible.
Well, again, if you're trying to create a new creative language, you're going to sacrifice universal appeal, but you're going to be pushing people's expectations of what they're going to see at a concert, and by subverting those expectations, you're going to turn some people away probably, and then some people who are going to be open-minded, you're going to reach, and it seems like we're not necessarily willing to sacrifice, like that. Like, we're still at that level of entertainment where ultimately you're trying to offer candy that is going to be sweet and delicious.
Yeah, I think we try to sneak in musically complexities and creativity.
Yeah. And that's why I think it becomes hard to, like, I think a lot of people, the weird thing that gets me, again, coming back to the straight white male thing, is like, people a lot of the time will say like, oh, well, you're really a boy band. And I don't know how I feel about that, because sometimes I'm like, I just got to give into that, and like, that's perception, that's fine. And I guess the thing that's interesting is like, if you're in the math rock world and you're going to take metric complexity, you're going to like mess around with meter in an interesting way, and we're not that, and we don't mess around with meter that much, but I think there is some metric complexity to our music. In the math rock idiom, again, you're challenging, like, that's sort of overtly what the mission is. Like, you're trying to create metric, you're diving into the jungle, and that's kind of the experience. And for us, there's still like this sort of like, you're putting within the pop idiom, there's this level that the complexity sometimes is a little bit more disguised because you're still putting it in this more universal aesthetic. So a lot of the time, I think what kills me about when people are like, oh, like, you're in that boy band, right, Kids Choice, I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of complicated stuff there that's like it's not that simple. But I think the thing is that when you work in the pop idiom, a lot of that complexity actually is in the service of a universal idea that can appear simple. I don't know if that was a useful thought.
That was a good little face at the end, though.
Well said. So I think just in the interest of time, I want to let that thought hang. And last question: what's going on for Kids Choice the rest of the semester? Is anything happening afterwards? With everybody graduating?
I had a discussion last night, and I think a few days ago, that was like, Josh, our bass player and dearest friend, is going to be a teacher next year for sure, probably in Eastern Mass, not interested in like touring around, getting dirty, playing crazy shows, is not interested in like having Kids Choice become famous. He's like, I'm kind of done. Owen's going to be in Hampshire College for 2 more years. Me and Ang are probably going to be teaching music somewhere in the world, literally no idea where. And Mike is like, no idea what he wants to do. I think Mikey is the guy, the two ends of the spectrum. Josh is like, I don't want to do it. Mike is like, I would love to do it. It's the only thing I know I want to do. And therefore, I think you sort of least common denominator. It's like, cool, it's probably, we're not going to keep touring next year. I have this dream of like trying to get people together every once in a while to like write songs, go into a studio, and record a music video. Like, keep creating creative music together that's interesting and fun, and maybe it will even be more fun when it's like a special treat.
Right.
But we're not going to be able to consistently be playing shows, practicing 4 hours a week. Like, that's not going to happen. So it is definitely coming to a close, and that like the era of Kids Choice practicing every week and playing a bunch of shows is ending. It's even ending right now. Like, we were talking about when's our shows, and we're like, we don't have anything booked until after spring break. And we're like, whoa, that's weird. That's never happened to us before. But we like just, I think mainly because me and Angus are doing Div 3s, who I think are usually the people booking most of the shows, and Mikey books some shows, and he's doing Div 3. It's like our minds are in a different place. It's coming to a close, but I think a gentle close that hopefully will be the end of this era, but maybe the project will continue in another life. We want to get t-shirts and CDs so we can be like, hey, anyone who listened to our music for the past 4 years and like want to head off into the world and be like, I love that band, I'm gonna wear this cool shirt, or like, and we're not getting t-shirts and CDs in the way that we thought we were a year ago, of like, they'll wear the shirt, they'll go somewhere else, someone will click on the website and the band will grow. It's like, it's not growing anymore, I don't think. It's gonna, that idea of like, can we become famous? It's like, no, probably not. Let's see if we can change the project.
It'll be a very slow growth. We're not trying to go exponential anymore. I think it's
Yeah,
much
like, yeah.
slower, linear.
Yeah. But it's coming to a close, which is pretty wild. But doesn't feel too sad to me yet.
That's tough. That's like the only thing I have to say. It's just a hard situation.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in the new projects. It's like, I'm also sometimes I'm like, man, I gotta go off and like figure out how to conduct through these mixed meter passages and where is he and kill my brain every time. It's like there's also joy in the new projects.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like, oh, this is my, and once you reformat your perception in terms of saying this is my time to be with my friends, I love the joy of coming to rehearsal 2 times every week, and I won't get to do this in a long time ever again this way. It becomes an incredibly beautiful thing, and the fact that it's finite makes it valuable too.
Well, I think on that note, I think we're ready to close. When's the next show? Spring Jam, probably.
Works out.
I think we'll have 2 shows on the first weekend of April.
Okay.
We have one in Skidmore, April 4th, and then one in Western Mass, April 5th. Then we have something on the 18th at Smith. It's weird. April's like gonna be insane. We were just thinking about it. We have like one on the 18th at Smith and one somewhere else that weekend, and then we have Spring Jam at our Div 3s the next weekend.
Yeah.
Then we have like Div 3 showcase and a goodbye show at the Red Barn. We're maybe gonna get a little Prescott show. Whatever. No one needs to hear about that.
Well, cool. Well, make sure you let us know about the dates and we'll post them.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks
a
for
lot,
having
guys.
us on. It was a blast.
Yeah,
Super interesting.
totally.
Super fun.
Happy to do it.